Hello, everyone, and welcome, Ricky Williams.
Yeah.
This is Maurice from OPA, the Organization for Professional Astrology. And our guest is our very special guest today is Ricky Williams, who was a football player, a very well-known and award-winning, converted to astrology. How long has that been, Ricky? Can you share with us a little bit of the sequence of events?
Yeah. I mean, it's really really interesting, crazy story. I was a football player, like you said, and I knew I was a Gemini, and it was interesting because I have a twin sister, and so it was significant, but I didn't really understand or know much about what it meant. And I kind of went through a spiritual crisis in my life, um, my my lunar return, and I have a 10th house Cancer moon,
Hmm.
and I was playing football, and I started to have this feeling of, you know, I don't think this is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. This feeling like I want to empower people and help people, and I feel like I'm just distracting people from their lives for 3 hours on Sundays. And so I started asking some deeper questions, and one of the questions was, I got to the question of, is this what I really want to be doing with my life? And it shocked me, and the answer was no. And so I was like, whoa. But soon after, I started to get a sense, a vision of myself somehow helping people, and that felt resonant with me. And so I end up leaving football, and I start to travel. And one of the insights that really triggered um, my journey was coming to terms with, my whole life I've wanted to be like a famous athlete, and I'm here, and now I'm thinking of doing something else. That it didn't really
How
make
old were
sense.
you?
I was 27 and a half.
So Saturn return and
Yeah,
progressive moon return.
yeah, yeah. And so I you know, I this idea of seasons, seasons that things change, And I remember a synchronistic event. I was in Miami, and I was leaving my condo, and the concierge and I were talking, and it was Memorial Day weekend, and I
Hmm.
was asking, are there any parties coming up? And he said, the season is over in Miami. He said, it starts to get so hot now, people leave and they don't come back until November. And that phrase, season's over, I started like going around in my head, and I was thinking, is the season over in my life for football? And it felt yes. And so I was kind of fascinated by this idea of seasons, and so,
Cycles.
and so I started traveling, and of course, this guy gives me a book on Ayurveda, and the whole book is about, living according to the seasons, and resonated with me so much that when I came back from my travels and realized I need to find a job, I thought, hey, I'll study Ayurveda because that resonated with me. So I start studying Ayurveda, and part of our coursework is we have yoga class on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and about 25 minutes from the school, there's a Shivananda ashram, and so one of the swamis from the ashram came to the school to teach our yoga class, and I remember after taking the first class, like I was like, wow, there's something like this is magical. And so I said, where can I get more of this? And he said, we have an ashram 25 minutes down the road. And so that next weekend, somehow got the courage to go to this strange, weird place. Again, I'm fresh off being a football player, so this is also foreign to me, but it feels
Mhm.
right. And so I'm a ninth house Gemini, so so I end up going to the ashram, and the head swami there, Swami Sita, someone tells her that I'm a football player and I'm at the ashram, and so she comes up to me and she says, "Where's your Mars?" And I look at her, and I don't know what you're talking about. And she said again, she said, "Where's your Mars?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "After you're done eating, come up to my house. I want to talk to you." And so I finished eating, and I walked up the hill to her house, and I sat down, and she asked for my birth information. And again, because I'm a twin, my time of birth was just part of the story, so I always knew it. And so I I gave it to her, and, she put the information on her computer. She was sitting behind her desk. And then, we ended up having like a 2.5 hour conversation where I felt like so seen. I felt more seen in that moment from this strange woman in orange robes, than I have from anyone else in my life. And so I realized whatever, her own personal spiritual practice and insights, but whatever tools she had allowed her to touch me in a deeply moving way. And interestingly enough, she's a Vedic astrologer. So
Mm.
my first introduction to astrology was Vedic astrology.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was such a connection between us. I ended up dropping out of school and following her to India and becoming a yoga teacher. But part of my yoga training, because she was an astrologer, was astrology. And so when we go to India, she was a wonderful teacher. She took me to most of the planetary temples in South India, and just really seeped me in this environment in a country where they really love and respect astrology. And so I think because I came in that way, I really got a deep appreciation for how the potential and how powerful, this can be. So I was living at the ashram for a while, and this interesting kind of quirky Vedic astrologer, Ernst Wilhelm, I think is his name. And, I started really getting into his stuff, and I realized that he was a Vedic astrologer. He used Vedic principles, but he used the tropical zodiac. And
Mm-hmm.
so because I liked his stuff, I said, I'll try it out. And so I started playing with the tropical zodiac, and it just started to sing for me. And very slowly, I transitioned over to pretty much Western astrology.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so because I was a football player, um,
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of free time and resources, and so I established this huge astrological library, and I spent a lot of free time just reading and reading and reading. And my natural curious mind, as I studied, I wasn't trying to make things fit. I was curious about how does this work, really trying to perceive astrologically. And I could make certain connections, but it wasn't until I really found a teacher that I resonated with that I really got the transmission of how to look at the world astrologically. And it's a funny story. There's when I really got to the point, and this was 2014, 2015, where I really wanted to become a serious astrologer. I realized I needed a teacher, and Stephen Forrest was, one of the authors who really spoke to me. And I looked online and saw he was he was teaching in Seattle, in Norwalk, and so I went up to Norwalk on my birthday,
Mm.
and I tracked him down and I cornered him, and I said, I said, hey, my name is Ricky Williams, and I really would like to learn from you. And the first thing he said to me was, "Don't hurt me," Oh my goodness. But then he said, yeah, I have an apprenticeship program. And so I started studying with Stephen, and I follow him around the world. And I think, just diving into really having a system, he's so systematic, to have a system in a way to understand a chart that really spoke to my religious upbringing and my natural spiritual roots.
Great. And that's interesting because I read on your website, Ricky likes to talk archetypes.
Yes.
And, that's an interesting phrase because not everybody's going to understand what you mean. And yet it's a deep statement.
Yes.
And I think that's part of what evolutionary astrology can provide is, that more spiritual approach to the analysis. So when you said that this resonated with your upbringing, um, can you describe that a little better? Like, what
Yeah.
was your upbringing, and how did that match? Because sometimes people feel like it's actually clashing with their
Yeah.
religious background.
Yeah. So, I think this is fairly common for a lot of people interested in this type of astrology, is they also are drawn to ideas of Carl Jung, and I'm currently in a PhD program at Pacifica, in a Jungian studies program. And and he's credited with really popularizing the term archetypes. And so kind of his journey, similar, grew up in a very religious family, and I grew up in a very religious family. And so at least at a young age, when I was susceptible and open-minded, like I bought in hook, line, and sinker. The mythology of especially the mythology around Jesus really spoke to something deep inside of me, But as I kind of grew up and matured, and it was filtered through the church, like most people, I lost interest. And so around the same time, I mentioned earlier, when I kind of had this breakup call as a football player, one of the things that triggered it was I read the Da Vinci Code, and popular book at the time, and I picked it up and read it. And as I got to the end of the book, I was really struck by the imagery. It really activated my imagination. The imagery of that there is a potential alternative story about Jesus than the one that I was given. Very powerful for me, and it activated. I mean, it's kind of embarrassing, but it activated a fantasy in me, and this fantasy of in the alternative story, that Jesus' bloodline went on, and somehow it ended up in France, and part of my family's slave lineage, the slave owners were French, and so I thought there's some possibility that there could be a drop of Jesus's blood in me, and so it kind of reawakened the myth, and young, at the end of his life, it came back to the beginning, right? He saw the symbolic story of what Jesus represents, and the hero has to die and transcend, the self, as this powerful God image.
Absolutely. And so you started practicing. I mean, you finished the apprenticeship, and you are seeing clients. Are you teaching? Are you providing consultations?
Yeah. So consultations. I don't really like the idea of calling it a reading, because I feel like I'm interpreting, on some level, but most people in astrology, we've moved away from the determinism that is really haunted us in the past, and we realize that it's really about possibilities. And so, my interest in depth psychology is realizing that these symbols are powerful, and they speak to people, and to just help amplify the symbols in people's charts with them, to help them connect to, the living myth that is showing up in their lives. And and kind of what connected me to all this was I was living my life, and I just intuitively noticed that certain patterns that were playing out in my life were also played out in fairy tales and myths and movies. And I started to see, wow. Then as I really started to, and especially my Vedic upbringing in astrology, is it's all directly tied to myth, all these stories. So being able to recognize the connection between what a chart represents and the power of understanding the living stories in our lives. And so in my consultations, whether they're with people or brands or businesses or companies, it's really about trying to help people connect to and engage that underlying myth that's there.
And how does that, I mean, I know many astrologers, go through a process of coming out of the closet, so to speak, because there's so much prejudice and misunderstanding projected, both from the scientific community, from the religious community, and even from just everyday people.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that, coming from an environment of this high testosterone and very physical, that people didn't always follow where you were going, from your environment in sports and your context at the time. So how did that happen? Did you feel comfortable sharing what you were doing? And
it's funny how life works. I felt like I've been prepared for this. So when the first time I had a reading with Stephen, we got to the to my second house, Uranus. And in that context, you know, he said, you know, the time where I left football and started to travel, you know, in my experience, he said that might have been one of the best things to ever happen for you, you know. And my interpretation of that was, I had this experience when I left football and I was traveling around the world, that everyone that knew me thought I had lost my mind. You know, they thought I had totally gone off the deep end. And my experience of it was the most alive and vital that I'd ever felt in my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had this contrast where I could, in my body, I could feel this is what life is supposed to be like. And so it allowed me to say, you know, this is what I want to feel like. The people that truly care about me and can support me are the people that support this, you know, and the people that can't, you know, I have to learn to not care what they think. And so it really started to empower me to be myself and realize that there's inherent value in that. And so when I came back to play football, I just was more comfortable being myself. And the end result, people were like, oh, that's just Ricky. And so, you know, whether it was astrology or yoga, whatever I was doing, there was a certain kind of acceptance. Yes, it was weird and strange, but I was still given the freedom to be myself. I think a more serious issue that I'm, you know, that we're all facing now is that I think people, and we all see that astrology is becoming more popular, and people are starting to take it more seriously. And you know, through my experiences of talking to people about their charts, especially, you know, talking to people about South Node symbolism and like seeing, wow, you know, like this is real, you know, like there's like, you know, it's not fantasy, you know, this is real. And just, you know, I feel like part of my life's work is trying to get people to a place where they see that this is real, you know, and it's extremely, to be extremely useful for us in our lives. And so people, I think, accept it as being something that alternative or weird people are into. I think what people lack to see is the practical value that astrology can offer to people.
And that's my, you know, my hope, maybe, that some of these people who, you know, laugh at you at first, you know, that's the thing, that's the saying. First they laugh at you, then first they ignore you, then they laugh at you.
Yeah.
Then they get angry, and then you win, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder if you have clients from that community, from, you know, the sport or your childhood, even if people, you know, at first were kind of resistant, but saw that if you're doing it and if you are, you know, gaining so much from it, maybe that can help me. I can think even of, you know, younger people who need, you know, to some kind of vocational direction. I wonder if you've had the opportunity to come back to your own community, and
you know,
offer that.
I'm still working on it. You know, I did something interesting a couple of years ago where on social media, you know, I have a decent sized following. I did like a contest where someone could win a free conversation about their chart, you know? And so it was, you know, it was a football fan from Texas, you know, who had never had any experience with astrology, you know? And it was a meaningful conversation, and it started to stir something up. But, you know, and I think this is, and I'll admit, this is part of my bias, is that, you know, I think, yes, astrology can be useful in so many practical ways, but what really excites me are the deeper levels. And so, you know, my hope is that people from the community which I left, you know, start to have more spiritual aspirations, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so this brings me to this interesting segment, to this idea of, I'm doing a workshop in Austin in April. And when I thought about, you know, what is it that I want to talk about, I started thinking of social media now, you know, and how people are able to make a lot of money on YouTube, and how we've really moved away from our parents, you know, who worked in 9 to 5, where people now are not doing that, you know, is that everyone's an entrepreneur, everyone is a brand, you know, and I have this idea, you know, especially for the Neptune and Capricorn generation, and that impulse is this idea of work or business, entrepreneurship as a spiritual practice. Is that, when you can truly align your brand, right, with who you are, there's power in that. And aligning that with making a difference in the larger world, I think can be very powerful.
And I read on your website that you also suffered some injuries, and part of the Ayurveda and cannabis was to support that and to heal physically, not only spiritually. So I think that in itself can be even something accessible to your ex-colleagues and playmates. And you were a football player in Austin, correct?
Yeah, so I went to college at the University of Texas in Austin, and so I won something called the Heisman Trophy, which goes to the best football player in the country, and so that was a big deal. Had a very celebrated college career, and then in the NFL, I played for the New Orleans Saints for 3 years. I played for the Miami Dolphins for 7 years, and then I played 1 year for the Baltimore Ravens.
And so, I think that's such an important message that you're representing, that transition from something that's so physical and that you're not afraid, even with the successful career and the public presence, to follow something that may not always be understood. It takes a lot of courage to not, like you say, to be true to yourself and not please your critics or your audience, but evolve. As you evolve, they're evolving with you. At least some of them will.
Yeah, and I found, the evolutionary process is inherently painful, and so, as part of healing is helping to so that it's not so painful. But we all have to go through difficult things, and I found in my darkest day, talking to this woman about my chart really set me on my path. And it was interesting that the one thing I took away from that first exchange was how unconsciously I had been generating so much stress in my life, that just, it just dawned on me oh my goodness, and then the funny thing was when she said stress, I was like, stress? I'm not stressed. It was so habitual, and my South Node is, in Aries in the 8th house, that,
Do you, you mentioned you have a Sun in Gemini and a Moon in Cancer. Do you mind sharing your data?
Yeah. So I was born May 21st, 1977 in San Diego at 1:57 p.m.
Okay, just let me pull it up.
My ascendant is 18 degrees Virgo.
Great. Thanks for being open.
Oh, of course.
So, and the interesting thing about, what you say, it's painful to evolve, but I think what can be so valuable is that we understand that the pain is not for nothing.
Exactly.
That it's not just random, that there's a higher purpose.
Yes.
And we can see, like you're saying, this is the chart of someone who, with that Mars, it's not just a battle on the football scene, but it's a battle in life as well. You had to overcome challenges and build muscle tone, not only in a physical way, but in a spiritual way. So it's so wonderful also to see how you kind of marry the mind, the spirit, and the body, talking about physical healing, emotional healing, and then higher purpose, spiritual presence. And the nice thing I think about your Cancer Moon, at least that's what comes across here, is you're accessible. You're a public figure. You led a glamorous life, and yet there's something very approachable and something very warm that that can be very helpful in reaching people, in healing. It's not so intimidating.
Yeah, yeah. I also, I don't have a lot of Earth in my chart, but there's enough, and and it's kind of feels like it's a nice spot. The Virgo rising and the Mercury in Taurus.
Absolutely. And I personally find in my practice that Virgo is an essential component in athletes' chart,
Huh? Yeah.
because you're constantly working on your body, you're constantly improving your performance. There's a level of practice and physical development that's essential with Virgo.
Yeah. When I talk to people about Virgo, I often use I use the idea of the archetype of the craftsperson. Someone who's trying to get better. And yeah, there can be a bit of feeling like you're enslaved, but not enslaved to a person, enslaved to your own need to improve and get better. And I tell a story of, as a football player, we have a coach, and every day I said, imagine you have a job where at the end of the day, the coach records everything you do. And after work, you go in the coach's office or the boss's office and you watch your whole day of work, and he critiques everything that you do. And I said, some players, they hate it and they feel like they're being judged, and they feel like they're being enslaved. I said, but some players really appreciate the role the coach is playing, that they're here to help us get better, and they get better.
And it's also it's a physical sign. It's a sign that has to do with endurance, with performance. Many yogis will have a strong Virgo as well,
Yeah.
and the right diet and the right movement. But the interesting thing, again, if we look at the chart, your Mercury ruling the ascendant opposes Uranus square Saturn.
Yep.
And you have that, you embody that very strongly, especially Mercury also rules your sun, how you come up with these new ideas and you change people's mind. One of your contribution, even whether you're conscious of it or not, is that the fact your life journey will inspire people, but will also challenge their way of thinking. What is he doing? Like, why from this to that? And that's already a Mercury Uranus, where you challenge people's perceptions, prejudice, and you encourage them to open up to new concepts.
Yeah, I mean, it's so it was interesting, this idea of, as I've been learning astrology. Hold on, I want to get a charger so my battery doesn't die. I'll be right back.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, it's been interesting, as a kid, kind of always feeling misunderstood, So I remember traveling, in this year when I left football and I traveled, and I had this experience where very meaningful. I was talking to the guy who gave me the book on Ayurveda, and I was staying in a hostel, and this guy was considered like the smart guy in the group, And so we're talking about the book, going back and forth, and I'm just sharing my insights. And there was a moment where he stopped and he looked at me and he said, I never thought about it that way. Thank you. And it kind of struck me, because I don't think I had really been in a situation where that could actually occur, that someone could appreciate my different, unique point of view. And when he did, like, something in me lit up, and I was like, this is what I want more of. Yeah.
And I think the beauty of this chart is, as a Sun Jupiter in the 9th, you're obviously a teacher. I believe that you're going to build your own body of knowledge, and in the typical Gemini way, you're going to synthesize different approaches and bring different ideas into one. But also, that whole Mars, Pluto is the ability to empower people, to transform them. So it's not just data, it's not just knowledge, but it's actually, real life experiences, shadow work, and transformation. So well done. And we're gonna hopefully hear more from you, and as you continue your journey
Yeah.
and your evolution in this field. And I'm wondering, what's next in your professional development, if you have any plans. um, are you teaching somewhere? Are you lecturing? You said in Austin, so you're going to be in Austin early April.
April, yeah, I'll be in Austin, and talking about again this idea of entrepreneurship, business, your own branding as a spiritual path. About putting an authentic version of yourself out into the world, and that it will, it'll reverberate, it'll resonate.
And do you connect that to astrology, or is it going to
I
be more
connected to
general?
astrology. Yeah. So the idea in the workshop is, and I got this idea from Shannon in Austin. Is Gemini. I tend to be up in my head a little bit, and my wife. So interesting. The story of meeting my wife is I met her and I wasn't picking up on it. I just how it is. I was curious. She was an interesting person. I was curious what her sun sign was. And so I asked her, and she said, I'm a Pisces. And I said, oh, the mystic. And she looked at me and she said, no, I'm a corporate attorney, and, you know, introducing astrology to her, of course, she quits her job and, now she spends her free time creating astrological content, so, just so experiential, and so the first day of the workshop is really going through the archetypes and getting people to have an experience of the archetype, because again, for me, it's to go into the placements and the keywords, the
Yeah,
interpretations, and all that
yeah.
is very heady. But if you don't, and this is something I learned from Stephen, if you don't have it in your body, then you miss things. And I think to really embody the archetypes, when you start to make the connections, there's some juice and some meat there.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes today astrology also so so popular on many levels, that it's not just, there's a internet, Instagram culture, and Facebook culture around astrology, and then there's the more academic study. And I think that people need, the accessibility of it and understand these archetypes on a day-to-day level. How is it really applying in my life before I get lost in complex techniques? So they're both necessary, but it seems like there's a need for balance, and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So you're going to be in Austin. The workshop is ASA, if I'm correct.
Yep.
Any other engagements this year?
There's nothing on the calendar. I in my personal, practice, I call them conversations, but even when I talk to people about their chart, I'm still teaching, and really trying to get someone to be interested enough to want to connect and see how the archetypes are showing up in their life, and being able to interact with them on their own. And so it's kind of shifting more into really mentorship, like, going in the past and looking at certain transits when certain planet, natal placements were activated, and really trying to find the archetypes in their story. So I had just interesting story. I had a client, and she's, going through her Saturn return right now. At the time, Pluto and Saturn on top of her Saturn. Okay. And she's saying, I look on YouTube and they say that this is a major event and I should see something, major going on in my life, but I don't see anything, And I said, okay. I said, here's what I'll do. I said, I'll explain to you. I'll give you a sense of the energies of what Saturn and Pluto feel like, And so then I just started talking about Saturn and Pluto. And she said, that's the way I feel about learning astrology, And so she was, just by talking to her about these energies, she was able to connect and recognize them in her life. And I feel more and more like what a chart is. It's a mirror. It's a reflection. Everyone I talk to, they're all living their chart. Some people are just doing it more consciously than others. You know?
Well, there's a saying, astrology is like gravity. It works whether you believe in it or not. It's not up to our own projection. There's something about it that is just part of nature, part of the order of the universe.
It's a mystery, it kind of, it makes you come to terms with the mysterious, it's just so trippy, and yeah.
And it's also interesting, just comparing notes just quickly. I also studied astrology and then came into yoga, and it seemed like the yoga was a very important catalyst in taking the astrology to a more spiritual level. It seems like if you work on your physical body, and if you attune your physical body to a spiritual consciousness, then the channels are opening. And I feel with your chart, with the Sun, Jupiter, and that strong angular Neptune, there's definitely something about tapping into, it's not just higher knowledge, but being a channel to, something that goes through you. Because in many ways, excuse me, I think we're all channels in some ways. Even a painter who's going to be using colors and creating something, you cannot just be mechanical about it. You can't just, you know what to do and the techniques, but if there's no openness to a higher message, then it becomes very dry and lifeless. Whereas, like you say, if you speak from the heart, and if you open these channels, you end up making the right connections and bringing all the pieces together in a way that can really touch people and transform them.
Yeah, I'm getting this feeling of sometimes, you really connect to your chart and you're able to talk to a person about it, and it comes out as poetry, where you see the harmony and all the symbols, and it literally like a beautiful poem emerges.
Beautiful. And so, we're going to ask just a few questions about astrology as a whole. You're doing this, you want to coach more, maybe write at some point.
Yeah.
We can see that also with the Gemini and Neptune angular. What do you feel, from your experience, what do you feel would be important for astrology for the next step for this profession? You come from a different world, the world of sport. And we see that very soon we're going to have a Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, and many people say that this will actually bring astrology even more to the public eye. So in your vision, what needs to happen for astrology, to grow and to serve even better?
Yeah. So I think there's two things that come to mind, and they're somewhat connected. I think the first is to find ways to show people how astrology can be practically used, in their daily lives. I think people are interested in astrology, but it's just ideas, and I think to show people, okay, how can I use this practically? And one of the projects that I'm currently working on is a dating app that uses astrology to help people first understand themselves, and then also to understand, on a deeper sense, the big question of why relationships, and our tagline is date deeper, so using astrological insights practically to help people connect, and so that's I think, and we're starting to see this more, but here's what I find, and again, this is my bias from from my teaching. But, Stephen, it seems like he only really puts out and shares what he's seen actually work in clients' lives. And so it's extremely practical. Some people might say it's simplistic in certain ways, but it works. It's easily applied to people's lives. And I think that the second part is, and this is more of a larger question, is, and again, I'm a Jungian kind of now. And so the idea that, and it's consistent with the Aquarian age. We need a new myth in the Aquarian age. And I think Jung was onto something with this idea of individuation, and I think the astrological motif fits to me extremely well with this idea of individuation. We have all these different parts of ourselves, right? They're all part of ourself, and they're trying to identify as oneness or as a wholeness. And so as we can really engage with these different parts of our chart and make as much as we can conscious, we move towards this, we become an individual. And so I think, on one, make it more practical so people can take it seriously, but two, connect it to this Aquarian myth or this theme of how can astrology help me become who I actually am?
And, who I actually am, and also help young people coming out of college, find the right vocation for themselves, and understanding teenagers. You said you felt so misunderstood. Like, think about some kind of teacher or supervisor who would have some insight into astrology, who speaks to a kid who's in trouble or who's confused.
I have this vision, and my wife and I talk about it a lot, of astrology is so versatile, and we all come from different backgrounds and we have different expertise. If we could kind of understand this language and use the astrological insights combined with our expertise, it could be amazing, And so really helping people, and that's really what I'm looking for is, and it's my bias, but I feel like all of the clients I attract are people that have some expertise, and they're looking for some extra little edge to help them bring all their insights together in a whole sense. And so I kind of feel like these people are showing up in my life that could really use this in a very practical way. And speaking of teenagers, I have 3 teenagers, 4 now. I have 4 teenagers. Well, actually, my oldest she's almost 21, and she just came back from college and living in the house, and she's fascinated with astrology. Every time I see her, she's got an astrology book. And it's tough being a teenager, being in her 20s, but it's helping her come to terms. And she's got a chart, fourth house Aquarian South Node, conjunct the moon in Aquarius, conjunct Uranus in the 4th in Aquarius, And
is she from this planet or from somewhere?
Scorpio rising with Mars in the 1st, It's Aries sun, it's a difficult chart for a woman to hold. And so astrology is really helping her come to terms with who she is, and help her understand why it's been difficult. It's the struggles that she's had.
It's also interesting, with Aquarius in the 4th house, it's bringing that higher mind to the emotions. So astrology can be an amazing tool for someone like that, because it brings that emotional intelligence, moon in Aquarius, emotional intelligence in the 4th house. And if she uses that well with the Mars, she can be, the one who's going to go deep with people.
She's like, astrology is giving her permission to go there.
Yeah.
Funny, she just, she's here taking classes. She just started school. She's taking a class on astronomy, and she told me, I was like, you're trying to catch old pops, huh? She's like, I'm going to be a better astrologer than you. I was like, go for it, And
Good.
My 16-year-old, same thing, He's an interesting story, but he's fascinated, That's all he does. His spare time, he's either talking to the Uber drivers about their charts or reading. And he's funny, a 16-year-old handsome young man with strong libido. And he looked at Venus transits, decide when to ask women out. And I'm telling you, I told him, you need to start creating content because he's got it science down, you know?
Wonderful. And it's great to see the next generation picking on it because for so many years, astrology was only accessible to people who would retire. You know, that's something we're dealing with in our organization. And we see that the internet is helping tremendously. But usually, you know, people couldn't afford to be full-time astrologer. And so it was the thing they would do once they retire and they didn't have to raise kids and there weren't so many expenses. And now we see that it's penetrating the younger and younger generations. And I think it's going to, you know, it's going to be on the table that when you ask a kid what they want to do when they grow up, they're not just going to say a doctor or a lawyer or a policeman, but they may also say an astrologer.
Wow.
Because that's going to be part of the vocabulary.
Yeah. Wow. And I think, with the death of the church, we lost our clergy members, and I think there's a responsibility to, and I think that's the other thing about the future of astrology is, the shadow side is, it can be dangerous. It can be dangerous,
It's powerful.
Yeah. Very powerful. It's, I had a teacher, he said, this is psychoactive, and I think, at least for me and my wife, we felt this tremendous responsibility to educate ourselves enough that before we open our mouths, we're honoring astrology, but we're also honoring the free will of the people that we're talking.
Yes, agreed. And also, this is the language, we are interpreting something that is of a higher nature and bringing it to a day-to-day language. And it is the role of priests.
Yeah.
That priests were messengers and we are messengers. And I think it's very important to also have a spiritual path, not only to open your channels and open your heart, but to also know that you have to use this tool in a very ethical way. And you have to come with a clean vessel and not only with a desire to know, because you can easily become a voyeur or, use astrology to trick people. It's so let's move to something a little lighter.
Yeah, please. Please, yes.
Just a few questions, to kind of wrap things up.
Yeah.
About you and your development and your life and getting to know you better. What is, if you can think on the spot, what is one thing you who has traveled and experienced a lot of highs and lows, what's one thing you never tried?
Huh. I've never tried jumping out of an airplane or bungee or anything extreme like that.
Yeah. In our interview section, we have that question, and that reply is almost 50% people say I never jumped off a plane.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I've thought about it. It crosses my mind a lot, and it's a fantasy I have, and I'm guessing that one day I will. But yeah, that's one thing.
So, do you have an animal totem? Like, you play with the dolphins, but is there a spiritual connection to nature, to a particular animal that speaks to you?
Wolf. Wolf speaks to me. Yeah.
Which is very lunar.
Yeah.
Interestingly, you have a moon in Cancer.
Yeah. The idea of tribe, I just as a football team, it kind of felt like a pack. And I was a lone wolf in the pack, but I still did well in the pack,
And you've traveled a lot. What's your favorite place? Maybe it's home.
It's Australia. There's a magical place, this town on the East Coast called Byron Bay. It's where just was a magical place for me where I met some amazing people and had some amazing insights. And it's right on the water, you know, just spiritual people. I just really connected to nature there.
Cool. And if we speak of evolutionary astrology, what do you think is an important evolutionary lesson for you?
Ooh, this is a good one. So yeah, it's been in relationships. It's really been a lot of trauma and stress and in family and relationships. And so yeah, you know, so I was married and then I divorced about 4 years ago. And what I found typically is divorce is very hard on people with a lot of Cancer energy, you know.
Of course.
And you know, I had this fantasy about relationship, like most people, but that the partner, you know, had to be relationship had to be peaceful, you know, no fighting. We have to get along all the time. And so I found a partner, amazing woman, you know, Cancer rising, moon in Pisces, Capricorn sun, you know, like salt of the earth, you know, just good heart, forgiving, loving, you know. But whenever things got intense or difficult, like would disappear, you know. And so on the outside, it was nice and it was a container for my career, but there was no spiritual personal growth. And so, you know, like, you know, walking away from that and making a different choice was the most difficult thing I had to do in my life. But it allowed me to start to embrace a relationship and relationships where there was more of that heat and passion and fire and that transformational energy. And so that's really been, I think, the most difficult and also the most rewarding part of
and
my life.
It takes a lot of confidence to be able to, you know, not just keep things pretty, to be able to dig and take risks.
Yeah.
And what inspires you to be an OPA member?
Just community, you know, community, and realizing this conversation has been extremely amazing and cathartic and just wonderful, and you know, really speaks to, you know, especially in something like astrology, you can feel isolated, you know. I mean, when you come together, you know, first of all, like, what an amazing conversation, you know.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's very inspiring, and you'll touch many people through this conversation. And I'm sure we'll work more together and cooperate on different projects. So first of all, we want to wish you great success in this journey, because you seem to be very authentic and you seem to be very good at what you do. You know, there's the glamour of Ricky Williams, but there's also quality, and that's what's the most important. It's not, you know, it's not superficial, and we applaud that. So you serve as a wonderful example of first of all transitioning and reinventing yourself and taking that risk, but also going deeper. And like you say, my life was not complete because I couldn't help people.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. So thanks a lot for that.
So again, I love this, you know. I feel seen, you know, and